That's a G chord. So let's talk about some techniques that I've seen on like Instagram, on YouTube, on all kinds of different social media platforms, just regarding like this neo soul kind of thing. Usually with the hashtag pickup jazz connotating that we're talking about extended chord elaborations. Now, I'm just calling it extended chord elaborations because there are a lot of things we could call this. This is not a new thing. This is not a new technique. This is not something that someone invented in the last couple years. We've seen people like George Van Epps and Joe Pass use this technique to incorporate melody lines into their chord vocabulary as early as like the 50s and 60s, but the guy that really pulled from those jazz days is kind of the grandfather of all this elaborated chord harmony, and that's a guy by the name of Edward Spanky Alford. Now, Spanky Alford has the respect of a lot of the cool guys on the scene today, people like Isaiah Sharkey and Carrie Too Smooth Marshall, a lot of guys playing what they call quartet music. But I reiterate, this is not a new style of playing. People like Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan were doing this. Hey, what's up? My name's Daniel McLaughlin, and welcome back to the YouTube channel. If you haven't yet, go down and hit that like button and subscribe if you like what I'm doing here, you want to support. Let's talk about chord elaborations. Alright, so being that this is an advanced technique, I want to touch on some stuff that we should already know if we want to be able to improvise this or write out lines in this style. The first thing is just knowing your neck, alright? And the simple way of breaking that down is with a thing called the caged system. The cage system is referring to the kind of style of cowboy chord that makes up the shape that we're using. So it breaks it down into a C shape, an A shape, a G shape, an E shape, and then a D shape. I'll show you that right now. So based off of that cage system, we should be able to grab some of the inversions that are around there. Inversions are just the chord based off of either the third, the fifth, sometimes the seventh. Here's some examples of some first inversions that we can play going around the cage system. From there we can have a second inversion, which means there's a G in the bass. Kind of tricky. And then from there, just knowing how to make some general alterations to each chord, like a sus2, a sus4, a major 7, maybe a major 9, stuff like this. Obviously, you'd want to know these chords and their minor variants as well. And then understanding the building blocks that go into each chord shape, things like the triads, how to alter those, just knowing things like this. That kind of thing. And then just smaller chord intervals like dyads, thirds, sixths, tritones, things like this. And then once you know that, or even some of that, you can just incorporate some connective tissue to build a lick. A lot of this connective tissue just comes in the form of some hammer-ons and pull-offs, maybe a diminished chord or two, or a slide or a bend, sometimes some single note lines. But once we start incorporating some connective tissue into moving to different chords, it's important to remember some of the chord function of the harmony that you're implying. Understanding what each chord does in the harmonized major scale. So when you've got a C major scale, for example, each chord kind of has its own distinctive pull to another chord, and it's important to recognize and be aware of what's happening with the harmony. Just some simple ways of thinking about this would be things like stepwise movement, so just going from 1 to 2, or 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, or perfect and plagal cadences, aka 4 to 1, 5 to 1, the reverse, 1 to 4, 1 to 5. Check this out. So that was a 1 to 4. I went from C to F. Let's hear what a C to G sounds like. I'll try and play something different. So chords in each scale have a name. Things like the tonic, supertonic, mediant, subdominant, dominant. But let's not think about it that way because that's a little complex. Instead, let's think about it this way. We have subtension, we have tension, and we have resolution. I want to kind of go in backwards order in describing those because our resolutions are the easiest things to think about. Our tonic, which in the key of C would be C. Our other resolutions would be A minor and E minor, just simply based on the sound, right? You can land on resolutions and they sound resolute. Our tensions are going to be things like the 5 and the 7. So in the key of C, that would make up the G chord and the B half diminished chord. Chords like this have a really strong pull to resolve, so they need to have a little bit of finesse in the way that you utilize them. Sometimes they can also be just great for the end of a line. But listen to how these work. And then subtensions, kind of simple, are what come before a tension. So things like your 2 and your 4. When you hear things referred to as like a 2-5-1, that's a subtension, tension, resolution. A 4-5-1, subtension, tension, resolution. An interesting thing about these chord families is they actually end up sharing similar notes, so that's why we can kind of reduce them down into these smaller categories. This way of thinking is helpful with this technique because sometimes we're just using 2 notes to imply these chords. Alright, so enough of the theory behind this. Sometimes the easiest way to get started in doing some of these things is to have a couple licks in your back pocket that you can start working with. I always like to learn a lick like this and then transpose it into maybe a relative minor or use it in some different contexts. The first lick is just going to be an A-shaped C chord moving into a first inversion. This takes a lot of inspiration from Jimi Hendrix and actually makes up the building blocks of what he built a lot of his chord movements off of. A lick like this is something that you can expand out as well, moving it up to like the sus4. Or if you wanted to grab some of the stuff from the minor pentatonic that's real close, some Hendrixy double stops. Or to put it in like a funk context like Corey Wong might play. Alright, so the second lick is kind of a neo-soul style lick. It's the ending to the song Isn't She Lovely by Stevie Wonder. Alright, so it's a 5-to-1 resolution. We're going from a B sus to an E major. When we talk about how these chord functions work, we can imply other chords over this static harmony, right? So for example, we've got an F sharp minor going to an E in first inversion, and then an A major 7 that's just this shell voicing, and then this B7 voicing. So all together. And then here's an E to round it off. So when we talk about some of the connective tissue or flair that we can make this sound interesting and unique, check this out. All of a sudden, we're looking at a little bit more of a neo-soul style lick. And this is something that you can use all the time because 5-to-1 resolutions happen all the time. Just start massaging it into different contexts and you'll be able to start incorporating it into your playing. Alright, the third lick is a downward moving chord progression that's based on a riff that's actually in the Christmas song White Christmas. This one's actually pretty common in other places too, but White Christmas kind of like spikes this melody right in the middle of it. And it takes from a little bit more of the jazz idiom. Here's how it sounds. So it takes from the jazz idiom because it's a true 2-5-1 progression. So being that it's a jazz lick doesn't necessarily mean we can't put it into a R&B or neo soul style context too. Check it out. So if you haven't gotten it yet, this is a pretty complex subject and it's something that I could elaborate on for a while. It's a lot. We're talking about the whole neck here. But I may do another couple videos on this topic. Subscribe if you want to make sure you see those. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.